You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel. And looks like Daryl had to bail on me.
No Sanders.
Oh, there you go. David's with us. So how you doing, David?
Hey,
yep. Hello, gentlemen. It's Star Wars Day. It certainly is. And tonight, we're going to be talking about the top 10 greatest sacrifices. Now, I got to preface this by saying this is not our personal choices. I'm sure we're going to agree with a lot of them. But this was actually done by, it's CBR.com, right? Yes. So CBR.com, they were the ones that put out this article like, I don't know, earlier this week or something. Dragonfly's with us. What's up, Dragonfly? And they were basically talking about what they feel is the top 10 greatest sacrifices in Star Wars. And honestly, I mean, this is kind of an interesting thing because a lot of times you don't usually get this sort of topic in Star Wars. And with all the toxicity and things that are going on, and it just seems like, you know, nowadays, I don't know, Lucasfilm just seems like they're just set to destroy this franchise for some reason. It's like they can't just, you know, it's like they have to do whatever they can to destroy this franchise. So, that being said, it's nice to actually go back and take a look at some of the things that made Star Wars what it is. And one of the things, of course, is the sacrifices that a lot of these characters have made. And it's really easy to overlook this. Now, I can't remember, was this something that you brought up? Or did I find this? I think you found it, didn't you?
Yeah, I found it. I'm the one who sent it.
Okay, yeah, I thought so.
Again? Yeah.
Oh, man, yeah, you're just kind of like freezing up and unfreezing all over the place today.
I know, I'm like carbonite.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of those, you know, because I know you're at our office doing this. I'm gonna suggest that we run a cable and you actually hardwire into our switch over there, which is a really easy thing to, you know, roll up and take out. Because, yeah, I think it's just, I don't know. We've been having some internet problems our end. I mean, last time I remember the stream actually sort of stopped, but you know, hopefully it hangs on. So, I mean, there's been a lot of notable sacrifices, right? I mean, everybody remembers Obi-Wan Kenobi's sacrifice. We all know that's probably the one that comes to mind probably the soonest, right? Either that or maybe the guys in Rogue One.
Yeah, I think the Rogue One was the most sacrifice, if you want to really put it there.
Well, yeah, because it's like everybody. You know, it's like the whole squad of people, like every major character. There is an alternate ending to that where the characters survive because they were really afraid, like, oh, well, should we really kill off every major character that does this? But I think that's one of the things, as we pointed out, that's very realistic. Sacrifice, look, if you're going to make something about war, sacrifice is going to be part of that. And so I think that this is a really good topic for tonight. So is there anything you want to say about this before we get into what CBR considers the top 10?
No, man, I think you pretty much covered it, you know.
All right.
Great job.
Well, and given all the internet issues we seem to be having on this particular stream, maybe we better get to it pretty quick, right? All right, so according to them, number 10 is Paz Vizsla. I had forgotten about this. I actually forgot about this. And that's the case with some of these, right? Where you're familiar with the characters, you know what the deal is, at least as far as the characters, you know, like their basic plot lines and story arcs and, you know, all the things that make up those characters, right? And of course, Paz Vizsla has come up quite a bit thanks to The Mandalorian and things like that. But I had forgotten that he did this. I'd forgotten that he had sacrificed himself.
Yeah, Paz Vizsla was, I mean, he actually kind of like a G. And so, I mean, he when he was the one with the big stupid gun, right? The big like minigun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think and he was that was kind of
He
a
was the guy that was really against Din from the very beginning, basically.
well, yeah, but I'm trying to think. I think he had that big minigun because I remember he was trying to like wipe out. He kind of like told everybody to get out, and he was going to hold everybody off while
Mm-hmm.
everybody kind of escaped. And I thought that was like really cool. And it was um, just the way that whole sacrifice was even shot. Like the cinematography of it was really
Oh,
good too
it was
because it
amazing.
was so emotional. Yeah.
But this is something that you see a lot in a lot of characters, right? Like, this is another one of those. I mean, not to, look, this is a great sacrifice. I would agree with this. But this is something that
Mhm.
comes up a lot where you have a character that generally clashes with the main character and they have this little adversarial relationship. And then, of course, first they sort of become uneasy allies. And then, when the chips are down, that character sacrifices himself. And, I mean,
Mhm.
that's the only thing about that I think that it's just, I don't want to say it's overused, but it is familiar ground. So do you actually agree? So again, CBR is saying, okay, this is a number 10 sacrifice. And I personally don't have a problem saying that. Like, I could say, okay, fine.
No.
It was well done. It was, the cinematography, all that stuff was great. But would you have rather seen something different for this character? I think that's the question.
No. I mean, I think it's one of those moments where um their relationship, we've watched the progression of their relationship um, from the onset of the Mandalorian up until season 3, and I think that it wasn't just. And so that's the thing. It wasn't just about Din. Though. It wasn't like he was doing it to save Din. He was doing it to save everybody.
Well, yeah.
He really stepped up as a really just like, okay, you know what? I'm going to literally bite the bullet on this, and really, just lay it out on the line. Um, And how I'm kind of judging these, I mean, I know this is not our list. However, um, and I'm probably going to make my own alterations as we kind of go through it. But I think what needs to be for me, the parameters are like, okay, what was the sacrifice for?
Mm-hmm.
And then what was the result of that sacrifice? Like, okay, like did it have meaning? How did they sacrifice themselves? Um, so in a situation where it's like, okay, the gravity of the sacrifice, I think that's where I want to go with it. Because some sacrifices is like, okay, yeah, like any sacrifice is appreciated and it's all sad. But like there's some where it's just like, man, the weight, like if they don't sacrifice themselves, what happens after that? You know what I mean? Like if they don't. So that's kind of how I'm also kind of gauging their list as well.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point because, look, I mean, obviously, even if we're talking in the realm of fiction, I mean, any loss of life is a big deal. I mean, it's, and a
Hmm.
lot of times, naturally, we tend to become desensitized to a lot of that stuff. And especially when something is treading familiar ground, we have a tendency to go, oh, yeah, okay, whatever, they sacrificed. But I think you have a really good point in the sense of how vital was this sacrifice? How important was it to either the rest of, whether it be the film or the trilogy or the season, wherever the sacrifice takes place, obviously. And how much weight does it have as it relates to the other characters? And what's going to be interesting is I think one of the ways that we'll sort of wrap this show up is we'll just think, okay, let's think of a couple. And of course, you guys watching this live, you're welcome to do this too. In fact, we want to hear from you guys what you think of each one of these entries. Again, I have to preface this by saying these are not our personal picks. What we're doing is much like anybody else that's reading along or whatever, is we have this list that was on this website, cbr.com, and this is a list they put up, and we're commenting on it. We're discussing it. We're talking about, do we agree with it? Do we think maybe, they missed the mark a little bit? Would we have put somebody different So when this thing is done, maybe we might talk about some notable sacrifices they miss, if they missed any. We can certainly see that. But yeah, so I agree with your metric actually in how important or how weighty was the sacrifice, because it could either be for the cause, like for instance, if this person didn't sacrifice, it could have been a turning point in a battle or something, or it could also be extremely meaningful to just one character. Like that sacrifice changes the trajectory of a particular character. So there's that too.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Okay, now this next guy, I admit, I had forgotten about this. I didn't like I was looking at this going, who? But the number 9 sacrifice in all of Star Wars, mind you, according to CBR.com, is this guy named Commander Thorn. Now, in their article, I'm quoting this basically, okay? Getting back to it, it's like after escorting Padme Amidala to Scipio, which is the home of the banking clan. That I remember. Thorn and his men were attacked by a force of droids, culminating in a valiant last stand on a landing platform. After all his men were killed, Thorn was left as the last man standing, where he mowed down multiple droids with his minigun, another guy with the minigun, before finally being overwhelmed and killed. Now, you could make the argument in this case that he was saving Padme, right? So this is kind of a thing. This is a big deal. But
yeah, I mean, you're saving a pivotal character, because if Padme dies, then okay, we don't get Luke and Leia. We don't get, what I mean? Like, there's a lot of things that don't happen if Padme perishes. So
right.
That, I mean, the weight of it is, I mean, even the way he did it, just being overrun by a bunch of, he's like the last one standing, and in true clone form, he's all about the mission. He's all about, like, look, I got to do what I got to do. And, I think that was, it was a good one. I don't think I would have put him in my list. Actually, I know I wouldn't have put him in my list.
Would you have remembered this? Did you remember
exactly,
it?
for that reason? Exactly. I would have had another person probably in that list, but
well, again, we could go at the end. Cool. It was, and again, we could go through a lot of, maybe some of the notable ones at the end, because the Clone Wars in particular had a lot of instances where, there were a lot of sacrifices done during the Clone Wars themselves, and you could probably come up maybe with something that's more meaningful. But when I was reading through this list initially, I don't necessarily have any issues with anything that they put on the list, but much like you said, I don't think Commander Thorn would have necessarily made my list. I don't. Yeah. Again, exactly. All respect to Commander Thorn and his fellow clones or whatever, but I don't know. Personally, for me, I don't think he would have made the list. All right, so the next up, we have IG-11. Now, he definitely would have made my list, because this was probably, to me, one of, I don't know, like the coolest, because not only was the sacrifice really well done and poignant and emotional, just in the way it was done, the way it was shot, but I think a lot of it has to do with the emotion that was leading up to it. And I think one of the things that makes the greatest sacrifices in Star Wars, this is what they all have in common, and that is there's some sort of a story or conflict or something leading up to this, right? So before this, you had Din Djarin, who basically had this massive distrust of droids. He hated them all. IG-11 comes along, and of course IG-11 used to be basically like an assassin droid, right? And he was set to protect Grogu. He was reprogrammed. So you have Din, who on one hand, he distrusts like any droid because of his background with battle droids and stuff with the Separatists. But
checker pass, yeah.
Exactly. Now you factor in that this is an assassin droid that Krill basically reprogrammed to protect Grogu, or the child, as we knew at this point, you can
Right.
really understand that. And it was a really touching thing because shortly before this, when Din was injured and IG-11 took care of him, he was the first being that actually saw Din without his mask. Like, Din sort of paid him that respect before all of this happened. And then when IG-11, knew that this was basically the only way that they could make it out of this, he chooses to sacrifice himself. And it was pretty disappointing, actually, as an audience member, because, as a viewer watching this, you just got a thing to where IG-11 and Din were cool. It's like, it would have been cooler, you wanted to see more of them, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, you just got to the point where you were cool with them, and then he's gone. At least for the time being.
If this was like top 12, top 11, 15,
No pun intended, right?
he would definitely be he would definitely be on the list. I wouldn't put him. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, everything you said is absolutely true, 100%. But I think his sacrifice wasn't as weighty as K2SO's. I would have put K2SO's in this spot. Just simply because, just be the gravity of the situation. Now, don't get me wrong. It was hairy. It's like, okay, Din's basically kind of like unconscious. Gideon's kind of had his people. He's flying around in a TIE fighter, picking off people left and right, So, it's really hairy. So if IG-11 doesn't set himself on a timer to self-destruct, basically, they're kind of screwed, because they're on this, as you see, he's traipsing through this whole little lava river here, the lava lazy river. So, yeah, and they really don't have much of a means of escape. So, yeah, that's why I would put it, like, if there was like a number 11 I could put, or honorable mention, definitely I would do this one. But
well, here's another point too, going to that. I could also see that, even though I don't know, I would have put, I wouldn't have even done that. I would have put, if you want to make that argument, then fine, K2SO, no problem. Obviously, that's probably one of the greatest sacrifices in Star Wars history. But why not put IG-11 instead of, like, I don't know, Commander Thorn? Why does he have to be number 11? Make Commander Thorn number 11. The whole IG-11 sacrifice, really, if you think about all the backstory leading up to it, and you think of everything else, that was probably more poignant than either Paz Vizsla or him. But again, I don't disagree. Let me get to a couple of chats really quick before we go on. David says, what effect do you think social media has had on the Star Wars franchise? Oh, that's a good question, because it had both a positive and, well, much like, look, social media has had a positive and negative effect on everything, pretty much.
Yeah, true story. Yeah.
Right?
Life, society.
Yeah, life, society, people, human interaction. It's just, look, there's just a lot of things that social media has had both an extremely positive and an extremely negative, pretty much effect on, right? So,
yeah,
I think in Star Wars, if you just want to look at that, I think it's the same thing. On one hand, it's allowed people who are Star Wars fans, like us. You could count YouTube as social media, more or less. Mm-hmm. And of course, certainly we have our social media pages. Hey, it's a good time to plug them, right? You can find us at Head to Head SW on Facebook, on Twitter, which is now X, on Instagram. Of course, we have our Discord. But the point is, yes, that was a little bit of a plug. But the main point, though, is that this has allowed our little community to actually discuss these things. Where, I didn't know any of you guys before you started chatting into the show, and now I feel like you're all my friends. So, in that sense, it's had a positive effect. And of course, the negative effect it's had is the toxicity that has spread throughout Star Wars. Probably wouldn't have spread so quickly and so completely if it hadn't been for social media. So you could say, that it's kind of a plus and a minus.
Yeah, I mean, to back you up on that, yeah, definitely. Because on the positive side, I think it gives us a platform like we're doing right now to actually talk and discuss Star Wars and have fun with it. It also is a great place to share. When you get trailers, people can discuss things. People have the whole social conversations about it, so you can feel, because like everybody, it's always cool when you have a space where people understand you. So
Yeah.
Eric, you're a bassist. It's like, okay, there might be many musicians, but like if you join a bass group, now you can talk amongst a litany of people from beginners, intermediate, professionals, all the way up, and you can either learn things, discuss your traumas, how to do something better. Hey, check out this new thing I figured out. All this type of stuff. So I mean, on the positive side, and we've seen things. We've seen fan-made videos. We've seen things where people posted scripts. We've seen all types of great content and things placed on Star Wars. Even like when they're giving constructive criticisms about them, like, I really like this. However, I think if they would have done this, great. Like you said, Eric, on the other side of that coin, you have the toxicity of, look what it's done to even the actual people involved. Look what it's done to,
exactly.
Kelly Marie Tran. Look what it's done to what's her name? Cara Dune.
Gina Carano.
Gina Carano. Look what it's done to even, when John Boyega. Like these things are,
in addition to that, we almost lost Ahmed Best because of it. And that was before social media really had a full foothold.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the downturn of it, it can become toxic to the point where people start attacking, the actual characters, saying like, "Oh, you ruined my life, and I hate you. I wish you to die." And it's like
George Lucas decided not to make any more Star Wars movies because of it. He actually blamed part of that on the reaction of the prequels. He's like, "Well, I'm not gonna. Why would I subject myself to this?" So everybody is sitting there crying for, "Oh, I wish George Lucas would come back because Disney ruined it." Well, you're part of the reason why he sold it. So there is that. He was all set to make 7, 8, and 9. But it was the constant fan negative reaction that pushed him to, you know what, maybe make this somebody else's problem.
Yep.
All right. Ronaldo joins us. He's like, "Hello, everybody. I'm finally able to watch a live show. By the way, Happy New Year." Oh, boy. Yeah, Feliz Año Nuevo. Yeah, I know that. I know that at least. Thank you, of course. Yeah, well, my dad. Is this number 10? No. This is like number, what, 8?
8.
So, yeah, if you missed number 10 and number 9, it was Paz Vizsla and Captain Thorn. And then, of course, he goes on to say, "Good effect. Fans can talk openly about their opinions and interact with other fans. Bad effect, a lot of toxic fans now have a louder voice, unfortunately." And that's a perfect way of putting it. Is the fact that it's like, yes, on one hand, you are giving a voice to all the trolls and the negative people out there. But on the other hand, it's like you said, you have this community where you can learn from other people, you can grow. If you're struggling with something, you basically have a built-in support group. And then on the flip side, you do have cyberbullying, where it used to be that, when you left school or whatever, once you left home, all the bullies were gone. Well, now they can get you even when you're sitting in your room. So there is that. And speaking of which, that brings us to what I believe is our number 7, and that's Clone 99. He was bullied pretty much. See what I did there?
That's it.
Yeah, he was the number 7. And I remember that was the whole story arc where they first originally introduced the Bad Batch. It was during that multi-episode. I forgot how many episodes that was. It was a
I think I want to say
few.
like 3.
Yeah, at least. But
At least 3.
at least 3. It may have been along the order of 4 or 5, but because that was the thing about Clone Wars, man. I mean, the nice thing was, okay, they would do these like crazy long, 4, 5, 6 episode story arcs. When it was something like this, it was cool. When it was something like the droids trying to find their way back home, you're like, oh, geez. Because, again, you have to remember, they never released the Clone Wars as like one big, pretty much binge-watching type of a thing where they put all the episodes out at once. No. It was week to week. So, when you're 3 weeks in and C-3PO's leading a bunch of droids off of a sand planet, you're like, okay. I think, can we please get back to, I don't know, all the political things that are happening with Palpatine and all the Jedi stuff that's happening with Obi-Wan and Anakin. It's like, kind of, I'm not trying to watch the droids here. But Clone 99's a good choice.
Yeah, I forgot about him. I mean, I do remember
I did too.
Episode,
I remember vaguely.
Yeah, I remember this, like, a bunch of the droids had like stormed their facility or whatever because they were trying to destroy the clone facility.
Yep.
And the Bad Batch, I think they kind of got caught in a situation where they were pinned down and they couldn't reach a gun, and he had to kind of go out there. He was like, well, I'm the only person who's nearby who can reach it, who can do something about it. And he did, but in the process of doing it, he ended up getting, popped. So, but he still, and it was sad because he was such a nice guy, and he always just had so much admiration for, his brothers, and he really wanted to be out there with them, but he was born with the defect. He was even more defective than the rest of them.
I know, yeah, right. He was the bad batch among the bad batch.
Yeah, he was the worst batch.
He was the worst batch, exactly.
So, so he was kind of relegated to being basically the custodian, and everybody kind of treated him like crap because it's like, oh, whatever. And, but he's always had, the love for his brothers and what they did, and he wanted to be out there with them. And the Bad Batch guys, they knew that, and they always treated him, kindly and with respect because they were the Bad Batch. They couldn't sit with the rest of the clones. They kind of had their own tables. It's kind of like high school.
Well, what I think that this was sort of an allegory of is almost like, even if you're, and I'm talking real life here, even if you're handicapped or have some physical disability, you could still be useful. I think that was
be valued.
So yeah, you still have value in life, right? And I think that honestly that was the subtext of the story arc, because that seemed to be where they were going with it.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see, Ronaldo. Yeah, Ronaldo's like, this guy has a very sad story. Yeah, he really does, man. I mean, he was one of those guys that, you're just watching it. I mean, and look, I'm guilty of this too. I'm watching this guy going, yeah, I would honestly off myself if I were him. I mean, there's some characters, I know it's terrible to say, but it's one of those things where it's almost like you feel through that character that kind of despondency and that uselessness, which is why I think it was actually a very, very beautifully written episode that would, because I'm sure people with physical disabilities, maybe even mental or emotional disabilities, could look at this and go, I can contribute something. Like it could actually give you hope. And, for that, seeing the life of this guy, and I really applaud the fact that Lucas wrote something like this.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of gave you that Captain America vibe, like before he became Captain America.
Right.
He kept trying, but he wanted to serve, but he couldn't because he was too short, too scrawny. He had all these ailments that he couldn't, get over. So, but his best friend Bucky, of course, was serving. So he was like, man, I wanted to be out there with you. And that's kind of how I looked at him.
Yeah. All right. So now we're on number 6. Number 6. This Ima-Gun. Now I remember the name, but honestly, I don't remember very much about this guy.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one.
I mean, he's another one of those dudes where I'm like, you know what? Okay, maybe he was super cool. He wouldn't have necessarily made my list. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, and when they say the greatest sacrifice, it's like, well, how is it? Most people don't even remember who the heck these people are. That's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah, well, and again, this
especially
is
to
what
be number 6 too. I mean, that's
but
rather,
but here's the
that's
thing.
rather high.
There's a lot, right? I would have put
I'm just saying.
IG-11, but again, though,
Exactly.
well, let's see, because I have a couple of thoughts on this. Like, number one, okay, before I even read this, remember one of your criteria was, how impactful was the sacrifice? How, how important was it? Maybe, because another criteria that you can go on, by the way, is how against type is it? Because I've actually said this about friendships a lot of times, right? Like, you'll have that friend who's like really loyal to you, and they're just like a really nice guy, right? Like, just by nature, they're a really nice guy.
Yeah.
And so, of course, they just do just about anything for you, right? They'll give you the shirt off their back. I mean, they're just really a nice guy. Now, you might have another friend who is kind of self-involved, maybe an opportunist, sort of looks out for themselves. I would argue that if that guy did something sacrificial for you, if it not only benefited you but had no benefit to them, that would actually be a greater act of friendship than the super nice guy, because now that guy is going against his nature to help you.
Absolutely.
Whereas the nice guy is just...
It's expected.
It's just who he is. And I'm not
saying. It's expected. Like, you almost expect that person to do it,
right?
Versus the other, you don't. Like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, even the whole to your point, Han Solo, like when he came back,
yes,
in episode 4,
yes,
and he was just like,
perfect
okay,
example.
It's like, okay, that was not character, because he was like, look, man, I got a bounty, I got paid, you guys are delivered, I got my money, I'm out of here, I'm gonna pay this bounty so I can get back to my life and do what I need to do. But at some point, he had a change of heart, and he was like, you know what? I can't leave this kid out here by himself. Let me go do what I can to help him out.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Perfect, because his heroic behavior during that battle was actually even more so than Luke, because that was just who Luke is. Whereas Han went against his type, and that was, I mean, in a lot of ways, that was a sacrifice, because, that came to bite him later on. If he had just gone and paid Jabba, you would have been a little bit better off. Like, all right, I'll catch up with you guys later, But this guy, I guess it was a Clone Wars episode called Supply Lines. And it followed this guy and his clone force on the planet Ryloth, where they fought a desperate last stand to help the Twi'leks escape the droid army. In a desperate diversion tactic, this is a big part here. In a desperate diversion tactic, Ima-Gun and his second-in-command, Captain Keeley, allowed the droids to surround them so the planet's natives could escape. Despite a courageous last stand, the Republic's forces were overwhelmed, and the Jedi and his captain were gunned down beside one another. So, again, here we have another Clone Wars episode, and this is, this is one of those things that is bad sometimes about the fact that the Clone Wars went for multiple seasons at like 22 episodes a pop, because a lot of things get lost in that. I mean, and admittedly, it's been a minute since I rewatched Clone Wars. But
especially some of these episodes, like, you might watch like the latter ones, because they cross over into a lot, or they reveal a whole lot more of what's currently in canon, as opposed to like season 2 and 3 of it, when you're hearing Sky Guy and all that from Ahsoka.
Right. And I mean, again, that sounds like, I'm sure that if I watched that again, I would probably be like, oh yeah, that's that's pretty up there. But like you said, I mean, that guy was like, number 6. I don't know if, and I guess maybe I could see, all right, maybe that's a little bit better. I don't know. I still think that IG-11 so far in the list that we've had is still the most poignant, emotional of the sacrifices.
I agree.
But we'll see. All right, so Dragonfly says a few clones on this list. I won't be surprised if Fives shows up at this rate. LOL. And again, you guys can go to cbr.com if you want to, check this list out and
read the background of it all.
Yeah, get the background of it, maybe read a little bit more into it than what we're talking about, but because again, look, it's an interesting list and it's fun to do these things. I mean, a lot of times, obviously, it's fun when Daryl and I actually come up with our own list because, first of all, you get twice as many. I mean, it's true. There are a lot of times that we do overlap. Like, I remember there was one, I don't remember which one it was, but there was like one top 5 or something where we only deviated like once. Usually the best that happens is, like we'll both say have like Mace Windu as a top Jedi or something, but he might be like number 3 on my list and 2 on your list or something. It might be the same people, but just at different spots. And that's kind of cool too, because why was he higher on yours and mine? Or, you can get into that discussion. This though is fun because you basically have this list is generated by this site and it's fun to just, pick it apart and see what we think, see what you guys think. It's almost like we're discussing this and reacting to it together versus us generating a list and people then chatting or commenting later on, do they think that we made good decisions or not? So that's cool. Now, I will say, this next one, which I believe we're at number 5, we are. I had to double check that, I admit. In full disclosure, I actually had to look. I do agree with this immensely. And that is Ben Solo. When Kylo basically turned from Kylo Ren, he turned back to Ben Solo, which of course was a controversial thing that, some people didn't like. And admittedly, I remember, back when The Force Awakens and then of course The Last Jedi came out, it was kind of like, oh man, don't do another Vader thing. Don't redeem yet another guy, please. But then when it actually happened, I'm kind of like, I'm sort of fully into this. Like, I'm on board with this. And in fact, I was so on board with it that I wish we had seen more Ben Solo. Like, I'm like, man, I actually like, Adam Driver as Ben Solo now. Now I want to see that. But I thought that and again, this goes into what you were saying before, where you take the impact of their sacrifice and you take the entire story arc behind it, like what led up to it. Not just the sacrifice itself, but basically what led up to it. This one, I think it's worthy of the list. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's worthy of the list. I appreciate where it is on the list, quite frankly, because although it's like, I don't think that Ben, I don't think his sacrifice was one that would have necessarily altered the ending, because it's not like they both went up against Palpatine or something like that and she needed him to. I mean, they were prepared to, but it was kind of like, all right, even when both of them were standing, they both got zapped with lightning, and what I mean.
Well,
so
he was definitely the Obi-Wan to her Anakin. Yes.
Yes. So it was kind of like, all right, I think if you'd have took Ben out of the equation, the results would have still been the same. I think it was just cooler because for a moment, we got the chance to see him as Ben. And, we got those little nuggets of like him acting like his father Han, with the shrug and all. And just, even when he did that jump and he was just like, ow, it was just
man, that's like probably one of my favorite parts. That's one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah, because it was just like, it was so unexpected. And it's like, cause especially when you see him as his dominant Kylo Ren. And
I know.
Now it's almost like he kind of lost that ability. He's just kind of like, man, that hurts. He became a real person almost afterwards. And that was cool. But his sacrifice, in the sense of that, how he saved Rey. I mean, the way they were making it go anyway, I think Rey would have been fine regardless.
Well, she would have been
a nice gesture.
But that's the thing, though. he didn't know that. Nobody actually knew that. You have to think of it in universe.
Right.
I mean, yeah, obviously, the outcome probably would have been similar. I mean, it could have been or it couldn't have been, because if you think about it, it was when Ben was lost that Rey was like, okay, well, now I got to call on the Jedi then. Because, and they had foreshadowed that very clumsily, I might add, but they did foreshadow that earlier when she kept trying to be like, be with me, that whole thing, and
Right.
nobody was
You know what have
answering.
been what have been cool, and I just thought about this, and I'm actually kind of really mad that they didn't go this route, because this would have really been cool, is if Rey actually sacrificed for Kylo
That
and
would
Rey
have been
died,
cool.
and Kylo,
Yes.
yeah, and Kylo becomes
Ben,
he's
and then Ben
legitimately a
defeats
Skywalker.
him.
He's legitimately a Skywalker though. See,
Exactly.
now Rey doesn't have to take on the name Skywalker, because Ben is a Skywalker. So, well, he's half Skywalker. So, you know what I mean? So I think that would have been a really cool thing, but that just kind of popped in my head.
No, that was a good thought, but of course the Force is female, remember? And
That's right. Yeah.
remember? And Kathleen Kennedy would never let
Silly
that
me.
fly. Dude, she would never, for a guy, a white guy. It's like there's no way in the world that the modern agenda thing would let that happen. But you are right, though. And I'll add to this too. If we were talking about like top redemption stories, or maybe like if we were talking about maybe an actor playing dual roles or something like that, this would probably rank higher. But I think I agree with you that this is falling in about the right spot on this list. Like not only am I going, okay, yeah, this should be on the list, but I think it's at about the right spot. Because you're right. I mean, there are elements of it that, I mean, on one hand, you do have to look at it from the standpoint of, again, if this is a redemption thing, and you have like, Kylo Ren going back to Ben Solo, I mean, that's huge. That's huge. I mean, that's every bit, if you really stop and think about the actual impact of that, of just how evil this guy was. Because in some ways, you can even say he was more evil than Anakin as Vader. Because Vader always had Padme as a motivation in his head, even throughout the whole time. He was lied to, he got mad at the Emperor, and even though, he had somewhat questionable motives and methodology of going about it, he wasn't power mad like Palpatine was. He just wanted order and everything in the universe, and he was just more or less willing to do whatever he had to do. Whereas, Kylo was just like unglued, man. He was just completely unhinged.
You gotta wonder if Palpatine ever like told Vader like how like all this happened, that he'd been orchestrating this from the beginning. You gotta wonder that.
I don't know, and there's a couple of things. Number one, I wonder, because the blinders came off on, hey, this guy really isn't my friend. I wonder if he could feel that through the Force somehow, or if, Palpatine just sat down and went like, hey, man, check this out. This is really what happened.
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, the reason why you don't have peace is kind of because of me. Because you got to think about it. Everything was fine until Palpatine starts screwing with stuff.
Well, and actually, no, that did happen, because there was the Lords of the Sith novel, which did actually go a little bit into the training elements of it, but also a lot of the comics, especially the Darth Vader series comics. Palpatine basically did say, he would say things because obviously a lot of Vader's power came from hate and anger, and so he wanted to keep that hate and anger going. The fact that his hate was, driven toward Palpatine was even better to Palpatine. It's like, oh, this is fantastic. So yeah, he definitely said, well, that's how it goes. Let me get to a couple of these chats before we move on to our next one. Well, I say a couple of the chats. It's actually all Ronaldo, but Ronaldo says, I still love the scene when he turns into Ben Solo. Yeah, that was just a fantastic, funny scene. And then he goes on to, basically say the same thing that we did. I agree. I didn't want a redemption, but I ended up enjoying it. And this is an interesting point, too. He says that he literally had no dialogue when he turned.
Right. Exactly.
Except for the aforementioned ow.
Mhm.
Which I also thought was interesting. But that's true. That's true. He did not have any dialogue after he turned, which is, I'm sure that was a conscious decision on their part. I don't think that
Yeah.
was...
Yeah. Unintended.
Yeah. All right, well, let's go to our number 4 then. So our number 4, and I wholeheartedly agree with this choice, and that is Kanan Jarrus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is
yeah.
this is
Now this-
definitely...
Now we're talking about weight.
Now we're talking about weight. Now we're talking, yes, this is... And, yeah, I would say this is probably, if not perfectly placed, well placed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, Kanan sacrificing himself for the man, and like I said, like the whole setup. I could tell because like when they start playing that, it's it was kind of weird because they would play this kind of music. It almost sounds like some of the Middle Eastern music they would play on 24,
Mm-hmm.
where it's real somber, and you hear that as this whole scene is unfolding, and you're just like, oh man, who's about to go? You don't quite know it just yet, but then of course, when they open fire on this whole gasoline, because that's a gunship on top of a fuel well, and you know they decide to, the Empire decides to blow it up, and Kanan mind at this point in time, which is the whole thing was really cool. So not only did he like hold back these flames with the force shot right here that we were looking at, because remember he's blind,
Right.
but
But didn't he get his sight back, though?
It allowed him to see, him to see Hera and all of them because the dust, and he used the force to kind of push the gunship away, to save. I mean, and then he just like let himself just get consumed. It's just like such a scene. It was well executed for animation. The weight of it, because it's like if he doesn't do that, like everyone's gone.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're a huge part of the whole rebellion. So at that point in time, so the weight of the situation, the impact of it was great. That he died was great. The setup into it was phenomenal. It was really, really, really good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I mean, this is an example of something where you're basically setting this up the entire time.
Mhm.
This was like a long... Because, now, I don't know... I shouldn't say that, because I really don't know if they intended for Kanan to die. Like, if that was Filoni's thing all along. But it seemed like
early in the episode, because he kind of, remember, Kanan kind of went away, and it was kind of a somber...
No, I mean from the beginning. I mean from the beginning of the series. I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
From the beginning of the series, because if you think about it, this was almost like a complete story arc. It was like bookended by his death, basically, because he was essentially much like Cal Kestis in the Jedi Fallen Order games. He was a Padawan that managed to escape Order 66, and he had to at first hide his force abilities and all that stuff. Hera ends up finding him, convinces him to join the rebellion, essentially. And then, of course, he finds Ezra and then decides to take on the role as a teacher. So you basically have this, like, sort of humble beginnings, and he's trying to mask who he is and all that stuff. And then he's trying to embrace who he is and pass that on to somebody else. And then, then, of course, he finds the Bindu. And, I mean, there's just all these things that seem to be leading up to this final moment. And, then of course he fathers, was it Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was
Well,
a
you
nod
also
to
have to
Jason
kind of,
Solo, by the way, but, that's a different thing.
yeah. Well, you also, and to your point, to your question about Filoni, like, did he know that he was going to do this? I think so, because in Star Wars, the reoccurring theme with Star Wars has a litany of. One of the things is that, like, the master has to die so the Padawan can rise.
Yeah.
We saw that with Obi-Wan and Luke. We saw that with Yoda and Luke. We saw that with um uh um the only time we really didn't see it was basically with, well, you didn't have it with Obi-Wan and Anakin.
But you
That
did
was a
have
whole
it with
different situation.
Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, though.
But yeah, I was about to say Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. You
Mhm.
did have that. Um so there's often a story trope that's used with, especially within Star Wars, where even with Luke and Ray, like, you have to make room for your Padawan. So usually there's, at some point, there's going to come a crux where the Padawan gets to a certain level where it's like, okay, because Ezra got into a certain level where he's pretty good on his own, and it's like, okay, eventually you're going to have to let him fly, and eventually that means Kanan has to go.
Yeah, I mean, of course, originally the master didn't have to die in order for that to happen, but
No.
obviously it does make for a good story. And again, this is one of those recurring themes in Star Wars that we see all the time, right? I mean, it's
Hmm.
kind of like, okay, first there's a symbolic letting go, and then of course there's the, yeah, I'm gonna die, and then that's gonna make room for you thing. Ronaldo says, do you think we'll see him as a Force ghost? I mean, that's a good question. Was he one of the
That
voices that
would
was
be
heard at the end of Rise of Skywalker? I think he was.
possibly. I think that would be cool to see if he popped up in Ahsoka, though.
Yeah, well, and they're setting that up. I mean, look,
Yeah,
let's face it, they're setting that
to
up.
talk to Ezra and Ahsoka, and
Yeah,
maybe even Sabine.
sure. I mean, I think they're setting that up. All right, so I think, what does that leave us on number 3 now? That would be, of course, Obi-Wan.
Hmm.
I almost would have ranked him at number 1. I almost would have put
Mm,
him at number 1.
no, I would probably maybe 2, but um, 1, no, because the number 1 makes sense.
Well, it does. I mean, it does.
It may has to. I mean, it's but number 3, with Obi-Wan. Yeah, because I mean, this is once again, now we're getting to really the weighty sacrifices. Like, we started with Kanan, and then now we're here at
That's
Obi-Wan.
true. These next 3 are among the weightiest of all of them, so.
Yeah, and Obi-Wan basically, decides to, he realizes, like, okay, he's probably not powerful enough at this point to deal with Vader. Um, so he realizes, like, okay, I can do more for Luke because I will become omnipotent at that point. So, I can pop up anywhere. I can train them from a distance, and I have all this ability that where I don't have, where I'm confined in this body. And I often talked about the scene. That's like, we all thought that's what lightsabers did. Like, when he got hit by them, like,
Oh,
vaporized him
yeah,
or
that you
something
just
like
right.
that. So, but it wasn't until later on I realized he didn't even touch him. So what the heck happened? Like, he just basically surrendered himself to the Force.
Well, it should be pointed out
And
that Vader, too, was confused.
well, yeah. And see, the thing
Like,
is,
that's weird. This never happened before. It's
when
like
I was,
looking at his lightsaber, like, what did I put in this thing?
well, when he started, when he's like, man, I'm more powerful than I thought,
Yeah,
but,
exactly. Like, all right.
when he was stomping on it, as a kid, I honestly thought that he was just making sure he was dead. Like,
That's what I
all
thought,
right,
too. That's exactly
you
what I
know,
thought, too. I'm like,
so you
it's,
shoot somebody and you'll kick him to make sure, okay, he's dead, he's not moving. It's like, and you
there's a
move
little
on.
bit of a Wicked Witch of the West vibe there, I thought.
Well, they were wizards, so or
Well, they
space
were.
wizards as
Yeah,
they
that's
were.
true.
So yeah, I think the Obi-Wan death was, um, and that was and so I just talked about how uh once a Padawan gets to a certain point, the master kind of lets him go, and it's like the Luke just really met him for like 3 hours,
Yeah.
and he's already sacrificing himself. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, um, this is weird, and so I didn't expect that to happen you know, um, as a kid. And then of course, like when I eventually when it gets to the trench run scene, and here you're hearing "Run, Luke." I mean, not "Run, Luke," but that when
Yeah.
when
No,
he was
the
actually
Run
talking
Luke
to him in the
one run was
X-wing.
it. Yeah, right in the X-wing, because the Run Luke run was basically when they were trying to get to the Falcon.
But even the whole time, I'm thinking that Luke is just thinking that this is what he would be saying to me if he were here in my head. Like I'm not thinking that this is actually him talking to him.
That's a funny thing, because even as a 6-year-old kid, I pretty much realized that he was talking to him. But I mean, I just basically look, after everything else I had seen in the movie, I was like, all right, I'm just gonna take this at face value. I mean, this is already like the weirdest, craziest, but most spectacular thing I have ever seen in my little
Coolest thing,
6-year-old
yo.
life. So yeah, I'm on board. You got some disembodied voice, from a guy that was just killed talking to him. Yes, I'm on board with that. I'm fine.
Yeah.
That was putting a little bit more thought into it. Ronaldo basically says yes, he, meaning Kanan Jarrus, was one of the voices at the end of Rise of Skywalker. I just wanted to throw that up there really quick, because that's we always like confirmations here on Head to Head, because, we admit, look, we don't know every little thing, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that come up. Like some of these guys, like your Captain Thorns and, some of these other people, there's going to be some hardcore guys out there that are like, really? You don't know who that, I mean, but look, there's there's just a lot of characters here. And especially the Clone Wars, there was just so many people, it's really hard to keep track of. But yeah, I mean, this whole Obi-Wan thing, absolutely. And obviously it was one of the most pivotal moments of Star Wars. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
all right, so number 2, and this, by the way, goes into when you said you were surprised that K2SO wasn't on there. I think he's just wrapped up in this whole Rogue One crew thing, because
Yeah.
I agree with you that I think that should have been singled out, because
I
that
think
was
that was
different.
separate. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that was different. It was a different thing. But I also understand, though, the spirit of it, because if you think about it, each one of these people did make an equally weighty sacrifice, and collectively, their whole sacrifice is what ultimately led to the destruction of the space station. And you can even go back to Galen or so, by even putting the weakness in it in the first place, and he ultimately sacrificed his life because of that. So, yeah, there's a lot that could be said about this, obviously.
Yeah. Well, Rogue One, I mean, there was, first of all, just a phenomenal movie, gritty. I mean, amazingly done.
Probably the
I can't
best of
say
the
enough
Star Wars or the Disney Star Wars films.
Yeah, I can't say enough about it. I mean, this was just off the charts to me.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole sacrifice of, and you're seeing different people. You see when Bodhi Rook, he had to make that sacrifice when he was in a ship to actually hit the button. Then you had of course, we just aforementioned. I talked about K2SO earlier, but then you also had Baze and Chira Imwe. Like that whole thing. I mean, it was just like watching everybody just kind of have their own destiny at different spots of the island just come to an end. And it was just like, man, then like of course, like the final thing is like watching, Cassian and Jen just basically, they're on this beachfront and you see the blast from the Death Star and they're just waiting. You're just like, you're just waiting for it to hit. And that's the thing. But if they don't do this, if they don't complete this mission, Like the rebels never get the plans to the Death Star. I mean, episode 4 basically almost doesn't conclude the way that it ends. So I mean, this was a huge weighty sacrifice because, you know, I mean, it has to happen. It has to happen because without it, Luke's whole thing and it's all for naught.
Yeah,
So
that's what I'm
without
saying.
the
It was a
sacrifice of
big
this crew,
sacrifice.
it's yeah, I think it's like one of the biggest, and this is why it's ranked number 2 because it's literally like one of the biggest pivotal moments in the whole franchise.
Right. It definitely has impact. And I mean, everything is so beautiful from a cinematic point of view too. I mean, that
Oh
beach
my god,
scene,
yes.
it was sort of like
Man.
you just wanted that to last, and you felt the fact that it was almost a suspension in time, right? That they were talking, and yet this blast is coming closer, and you know this is their final few moments, and they know it's their final few moments, and that just the beauty of that scene set against a backdrop of destruction. So there's that juxtaposition. I mean, it was
Yeah.
stunning, absolutely stunning. And then, of course, just each one of their deaths actually was very poetic, very,
Very
very
poetic,
well
yes.
done, and elicited a lot of emotions. So yeah,
Yeah.
right. I can't say enough about it either. All right, so that of course brings us to our number 1, and I don't think this is going to be a surprise to anybody, and that is of course
Right.
Darth Vader,
Yeah.
which
I mean, it
mirrors
has
in a
not
way
yeah.
the Ben Solo thing, but even more so.
Yeah. I mean, hands down, this is like one of the greatest moments in cinema history to me because, you really see the love of a father kind of, for his son. And, when he has to make that choice, he's been doing all this wreckage for like years and, not knowing that he has a child out here. And then they get into it. He's trying to convert him. He doesn't have, and then his son, of course, helps him realize who he really is. It brings him out of this darkness. And, Darth realizes like, okay, like I can't really go back after this. Like but my son shouldn't have to punish because I've already lost enough.
Mm-hmm.
So he makes that ultimate sacrifice. And then, when it's all said and done, it's like, man, one of the most touching things, like, um, he said he'll help me take this mask off. And at first, of course, as a kid, I'm like, we're gonna see who's under the
Oh,
mask.
I
Like
know,
that was
right?
like for me,
Yeah, exactly.
I was just like, what does he look like? And of course, Luke is like, but you'll die. And then Ben's like, gonna die anyway. So basically, just take it off. Let me just look on you one time with my own eyes. Let me just see you for who you really are. I mean, it was like kind of a double entendre in a way because physically, let me look at you with my own eyes. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, he gets to look at him from the eyes of Anakin and no longer
Right.
Vader. And
Exactly.
that was just like, man, like, okay,
That was a
that was
tear-inducing
really cool.
moment, no doubt, man. I
Oh
mean, it's
yeah.
like, let me look at you, and I'm just like, and of course, this is something you're not used to from this character. Sentimentality,
Mhm.
uh, just, I mean,
Yeah.
this is just not something that. And then, of course, he becomes almost like this kindly grandfather in a way. I mean, it was just such another beautifully written scene.
You know what? And it once again, some things just dawned on me, and I wonder if it was intentional. So when we see one of the moments at the in Rise, not Rise, in Revenge of the Sith, when he's actually being put into the Vader suit, and then you see the helmet slide on,
Mm-hmm.
and then you hear him take that first Vader breath
Yep.
that we all know, juxtaposed to here at the end of Return of the Jedi, he's like, "Go, my son, leave me," and then you hear him take that last Vader breath,
Yeah.
and it's not as full. Is like you can tell it was like it's more human,
Right.
and I was just like, wow. Now that I'm thinking about it, that even just thinking about it gives me kind of like a chill because it's like,
Well, and
wow,
it's also, if you think about it, it's also like turning around the line from that Obi-Wan said in A New Hope. So now you could say he's more man now than machine.
yeah,
It's flipping that. So I think a lot of
mhm,
that, knowing Lucas, I Like a lot of that stuff. I mean, I say that like I'm golfing with him tomorrow, but I mean, there's, I mean, there
At least
just
it'll be warm.
yeah, exactly. There is that. So yeah, I mean, those were all really good. I mean, look, I gotta say though, I mean, was there any like for me, one of the notable ones that was absent was Han Solo.
Mm, okay, yeah.
That I think should have been on there. I think some people I think might be tempted to put Qui-Gon on there, but he didn't actually sacrifice himself. He just lost. He was. I mean, look, let's just be honest. He lost. You could say that with Mace Windu too. Mace Windu didn't sacrifice anything. He basically didn't expect to happen what
But
happened.
what I am surprised is Luke wasn't on there.
Yeah, Luke would have been another one. I'm trying to think. Are there any other ones that you can think of?
So mine, the couple that I wanted to put in there was Luke, because he actually expended, like, him expending that much energy into the Force after being cut off from it for so long basically killed him. It's like, okay, he really didn't have, but he did it because otherwise they would have been, once again, the impact of he doesn't do anything, they're all screwed. Being on that little base, and you got basically the First Order bearing down on them with all these giant AT-ATs and that
Mm-hmm.
weird cannon that they had, right? So you have that, of course, K2SO, as aforementioned. Was the Let me see if there. I think those were my only two that I think that were really. I mean, Han, yes, that was another good one.
It's a big one because
Uh,
again, we just talked about it goes into the same logic slightly that you were talking about with A New Hope, where this is against his type. Now, granted,
yeah.
this was a different kind of a thing, but this was mirroring in a way the Vader Luke thing because Han was sacrificing himself out of his love for his son. The difference is his son is the one that took his life. So that
Yeah.
was somewhat of an interesting juxtaposition as well, is the fact that Vader is sacrificing his life to save his son and becomes redeemed through it, whereas Kylo, Han is basically sacrificing himself to save his son, but it's his son that kills him, which cements his turn to the dark side. So it's an opposite path. So that was brilliantly done.
Now, I had another one. I'm not quite sure if I can use it. I think I can, but I'm going to go with Ahsoka, because on one hand, she did sacrifice herself fighting Vader and pushing Ezra out of that Sith temple. And of course, in the world between worlds, Ezra does eventually come back and rescue her from that moment. But for a moment in time, she did make a sacrifice.
Right. Like she didn't end up dying, but I mean, she felt she would
Ultimately,
have.
but
Well,
yeah.
I'll do another one then. I mean, if that one's on the table, then Leia's got to be on the table. Because even though her initial injuries were caused by, of course, being blown out after the TIE fighter shot him up, she basically ultimately sacrificed her life, giving herself to the Force in order to turn Kylo back to Ben. She used basically the energy that was keeping her alive and said, you know what? I'm not going to use this Force power to heal myself. I'm going to use all this Force power to help turn Ben back to the light side and sacrificing my own life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's flimsy, but it works. All right, so now I think, yes, Ronaldo has his own list. Let's see what he has to say. And you guys still have a few minutes probably to chat in the rest of yours. So his top 10. So 10, he's got K2SO, which of course, Qui-Gon Jinn, again, that wasn't really a sacrifice. He more or less lost. He took his eye off the ball. He wasn't sacrificing himself for anybody. He just lost.
He just got
yeah. Kanan Jarrus, okay,
Kanan.
good. Ben Solo, Leia, all right, see. Cassian, Han Solo, yep. We just talked about that, of course. Obi-Wan, Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader. Yeah, I mean, I would say that was solid, except for the fact, again, you might have to,
Qui-Gon.
you might have to maybe put, I don't know, like Captain Thorn back in there or something, because,
Well,
or
that's
IG-11.
man. Yeah, there
IG-11,
you
dude.
go.
I mean, that was, if you really go back and rewatch that scene, that was an amazing example. It's actually one of the best examples of a Star Wars sacrifice that there are. I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, granted, you can't say it had the same impact as like Obi-Wan or Anakin or something like that, but I mean, look, it was, if you take it for what it was in the scene and the impact and all that, and
At
the
that
impact that
moment, yeah.
at that moment with those characters, with the stakes that were there, I mean, it was every bit as important. So, I mean, in your list, the only thing that I would do is I would modify it. I would just put that instead of Qui-Gon. That's how I would do it. But yeah, I mean, overall, I got to say, man, I thought that it was a pretty good like, I wasn't all like twisted up
Yeah.
or going on some sort of a rant or something based on that
This
list.
is stupid.
Yeah. I mean, and it could have been the case, because honestly, I expected that. I was kind of like, ooh, let's see, because a lot of times people just don't seem to. That's another thing, by the way, that Disney has done, is it's sort of skewed people's assessment, I think, of Star Wars, right? To where if you haven't been a longtime fan, if you don't really get into the actual architecture of it, the storytelling of it, all that stuff, all the subtleties and the nuances, I think a lot of things blow by you, and it causes you to have this somewhat skewed, illogical, just faulty view of the franchise. And a lot of times it's being reflected in a lot of these articles that are written on all these websites as you're looking at it going, do you even watch Star Wars? I mean, that's usually how it is. So whenever these lists come up, you kind of are bracing yourself going, you know what? I hope I don't burst a blood vessel today. That's basically what it comes down to. But this list, other than the omissions that we talked about, I might have maybe moved IG-11 down. I would have slotted in Han Solo as probably maybe number 3 or something. There's just a few changes I would have made, but overall, I think it was a good list. I think it was fair. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that was when I saw it, I was like, okay, this list isn't too bad. And then after perusing it a couple more times, I was like, well, I will probably switch a couple people out, but by and large, they got most of the people that I think, especially in the keyer spots, like starting from like 4 on up, or you just say even 5, like 5 on up was like, okay, you know what? Like top 5 has to be good, really good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. All right, Ronaldo's got another chat here. He says, "Oh, we forgot the greatest sacrifice in the franchise's history. Wade from the Obi-Wan show."
Wade.
Yeah, use that guy. It's like I see him, but it's hard for me to describe him. But actually, what's the Inquisitor chick's name? The one that Moses Ingram played.
Oh, third sister.
Yeah, she sacrificed herself, didn't she?
Mm-mm.
You could tell that I've really watched this show carefully.
No, she Vader, of course,
Well, she turned good, I know that.
Yeah, but she was trying to because her whole thing was really more, she was never really trying to be bad. She was just wanted to get close enough to be able to kill Vader.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that is a good point. Ronaldo's like, Rip Wade, 2022 to 2022. I'm gonna have to rewatch
Actually,
that now.
The greatest sacrifice in Star Wars
is Star Wars.
The greatest sacrifice, yeah, Star Wars, all of Star Wars, is George Lucas giving it over to Disney. That was the greatest sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, George Lucas made the greatest sacrifice in Star Wars.
That's the greatest impact.
He sacrificed he sacrificed the entire franchise. Way to go, George.
Exactly.
All right, well, you guys still have about 30 seconds or so to maybe chat in your list. If you don't get a chance to, definitely leave it in the comments section. I don't know, maybe I'll put a poll up or something in relation to this. We can, of course, take this to Discord. There's all kinds of ways that we can keep this going, by the way. There's Facebook, there's Discord. We got a group on there, the Head to Head to Star Wars community. However you guys want to do it, we're here. We monitor everything. Check it out. Monday, we were doing, I think, what we're most looking forward to in 2024. We're going to talk about some of the projects that are coming up in 2024, some of the confirmed ones, and we're going to, of course, weigh in on them and just, talk about what we think is going to happen and what might not happen. Because as you guys know, Lucasfilm confirming projects is somewhat of a tricky thing. It doesn't really hold the same amount of weight, I think, that other studios do. So, but we'll look at everything that's confirmed for 2024, and we'll talk about it and everything else. All right, so I think that's going to do it for tonight's show. Don't forget, of course, to like and subscribe. You guys know the drill. The button's right there. All you got to do is press it for us. So we want to thank everybody who's watched the show, who's continuing to support the show. We really appreciate all of your support. It really means a lot. So, make sure that you check out some of our previous shows. We went over the best of 2023. We reviewed Rebel Moon. That was a fun show. So, go back and check that out. And, of course, every day we release a new YouTube short that basically highlights a different character. So make sure you check those out. Let us know what you think of those. If there's something that you would want different that we can make shorts on, we can certainly do that. Because remember, we're not here for us. We're here for you. So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Anders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.